are joined today by
J.R. Romano.
Well, hello, J.R. Romano here with the Connecticut Republican Party. We have a lot of exciting and interesting, what I'd say drama-filled topics today. I think I'll start, as I usually start these off when I kind of go from federal to state. I want to let everyone know to continue to listen. We actually have a very interesting guest. We're bringing on Darnell Crosland, who is going to be running for mayor of Norwalk. He's a former Democrat, left the party. We're going to kind of get into his transition as why, how we started to see the flaws and the hypocrisy within the Democratic Party. So it's an interesting conversation. But first and foremost, as we talk about hypocrisy, let's start with our dear, dear friend, Dick Blumenthal. This week, as lots of conversations happened around illegal immigration and the ICE raids and law enforcement. For those who are unaware, and I'm sure many of you listening to this are well aware, that Antifa has basically, it's a domestic terrorist organization that targeted ICE law enforcement who are executing warrants, deportation notices, were attacked. In one instance, they took down an American flag, and it's just been, for the lack of a better term, gross. The way that these activists are operating, believing that they're morally justified in violation of the law. And what they fail to recognize is, where's that line? And this is what is so disturbing about someone like Dick Blumenthal, or anyone actually on the Democratic side of the aisle, when we're talking about the idea of rule of law. Dick Blumenthal has tried to introduce legislation that if someone is has a deportation notice and they run into certain areas of like sanctuary, it's almost like, I remember as a kid watching the cartoon, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, sanctuary. Here's the problem. So I want to understand, and listen, I will be happy to talk to any Democrat. You want to comment on these things. I want to know how you can justify the idea that someone who is trying to get a better life, and I'm not even going to talk about the 30% or 15% of what we know, the criminal activity that happens at the border and some of the illegal crossings, whether it's drug dealing, whether it's sex trafficking, which exists, even though they pretend it's not real. It is, and it's a real problem. But anyone that's trying to get a better life, what the Democrats are basically saying is that if you are from another country, if you're non-citizen, and you are attempting to get a better life, you are allowed to violate the law. Is essentially what they've done. Is they've assigned this morality cloud, or this morality wall around anyone that is trying to get a better life. I'm using air quotes, and they're allowed to violate the law. So here's where does the next line begin, right? So I've always discussed how, growing up in a small, poor community, and Darnell and I get into this, but what happens when it's an American citizen that violates a law in order to try to get something better, improve their lot in life? Is it okay to steal money? Is it okay to sell drugs? Because what I don't understand is, if an American citizen were to violate the same laws with the same codes, there would be consequences. And the Democrats are basically becoming a party that believe they're morally justified in violence and that they are above the law, that their constituencies are allowed to violate legal statute. And they're trying to dismantle the rule of law. And this is where it gets really scary. And what Dick Blumenthal is doing is saying, okay, if you break this law, don't worry about it because you're getting a better life. Run into this building and ICE can't touch you. It's just, and by the way, Dick Blumenthal, and Darnell and I talk about this when it came to a woman who violated a law trying to make a better life for her son, was nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found, because this is the hot topic of the moment, and the Democrats are trying to capitalize on emotional voters that are not centered around facts. They're not centered around laws. All they are based on emotion. And this is the problem within the current Democratic Party is that there's no logic, there's no fact base, there's nothing. It's all emotional, and it's all about holding on to power. And on that, let's move to what a week Ned Lamont has had. It is, if you were to write for, I don't know if you remember, there was an old sitcom called Spin City, and it was kind of like the mayor was like this bumbling guy. That's Ned Lamont. He has completely embarrassed, and this goes back to this whole thing where he doesn't know what he's doing. He had lined up and he'd written a letter to get this I'm trying to think, the Bloomfield superintendent of schools, James Thompson, right? Ned Lamont has asked him to be the commissioner of education. Now, regardless of my opinion and how the Department of Education is working, all that aside, the incompetence of how this all went down and embarrassing this superintendent in schools is laughable. So they ask him, and then because of pressure from another Democrat group, and with Democrats, when it comes to their election, they always look at things in terms of that identity politics, like which block is bigger and has more political power and capital, right? So Ned Lamont made this decision and chose James Thompson, and all of a sudden Ned Lamont started getting pressure from a different group saying, no, we want this person. And so he went back and forth 3 or 4 times publicly saying, no, this guy, no, this guy, no, this guy. This is the governor of the state of Connecticut. And no surprise, this week he did the same thing. Oh, no, I'm bringing back tolls on trucks. Oh, no, wait, no, I'm not. Oh, yeah. It is. This is what happens when you elect Democrats. I cannot stress enough. They are not leaders. They don't lead. They don't make tough decisions. They're and this is a prime example of that. He didn't know what he was going to do with the Department of Education. It's just, you want to shake your head, which is why we have to continue to have these conversations with our friends and neighbors when it comes election time, talking about the incompetence. Forget about all the emotional voting. Look at what's happening in our state. It was another report saying we lost jobs yet again for another month. I think another 1,000 jobs we lost. All because of the incompetence within the Democratic Party and because they've been in charge of the legislature for 30 some odd years. We have to be having these civil conversations with our friends and neighbors and reminding them that what Democrat leadership has gotten us. And not to be outdone this week, by the way, after embarrassing this superintendent of schools of Bloomfield, Ned Lamont decides to have a bill signing ceremony, right? Like, these things where they kind of make a big deal and like, oh, hey, bring in the press cameras and don't ask me any questions. He literally threw out a local reporter from this press bill sign, honorary bill signing, which if my understanding is the bill is already a law, but this was just for the media to see like the ceremonial thing. And he threw a reporter out of that room. He threw a reporter out of that room that was invited there by Themis Claridis, the minority leader. She's a great representative, a great leader in the House. And Ned Lamont threw this reporter out of the office for a ceremonial bill signing. It's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment. So as he's planning his Woodstock concert, he's trying to redecorate his office. He's throwing reporters out. He can't decide on what he's going to do for tolls, which, by the way, aren't going to pass anyway because no one in the state wants them. And the best part about it is, and I'm sure he's really sad and can't understand why no one likes Ned. His approval rating is around 30%, and it's only going to get worse. There is a complete lack of leadership within this organization, within this administration. Say what you want about Dan Malloy. He made a decision, although they were all wrong decisions. He stuck with it and he fought. This governor has no idea what he's doing. And the people that are going to suffer are the people who live in Norwich, the people that live in New London, Norwalk, because the taxpayers ultimately are going to be on the hook for all this incompetence. And that's the part that Democrats laugh about. It's almost laughable to them when they screw up, like, because to them there's this unlimited pot of money, right? Because it's not their money. So what do they care? All they care about is being in charge and in power. And I'm so excited, actually. because my next guest is going to talk about that. And he's going to talk about it specifically in the context, having been a major part of the NAACP, and having been a major player within the Democratic Party, and recently switching. And I'm so excited to have him on. So joining me next will be Darnell Crosland. So stay tuned. Joining me now is a gentleman who recently decided to leave the Democratic Party, and I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with him and have a broader kind of look at Republican policy versus Democrat policy and how it impacts a very specific group. And this is why it's so exciting for me to have these conversations. But the person I'm about to bring on, Darnell Crosland, is currently in the midst of running for mayor of Norwalk. But more importantly, he's a major player and figure within the African American community within Norwalk and within Connecticut. And he and I had a long conversation about policy and where he started to see the Republican Party's policies on education and taxation and entrepreneurship are more in line with what he thought, or the perspective of where our state and our country should go. So I'm really excited to have you on, Darnell. And first and foremost, tomorrow night, right, Monday, is the caucus, because you're looking for the endorsement of the Republican Town Committee in Norwalk, correct?
That is correct.
Now, and I know you and I had a very long conversation, and I think it was a Sunday or Saturday afternoon. I actually stepped out of a campaign management training school to talk to you, because you and I actually shared, without knowing it, this linkage centered around a case that I think gets little to no attention. Is we are one of I think the only state in the country to put a woman in prison for stealing an education, correct?
That is correct.
And you were unaware of the fact that I had written some op-eds absolutely chastising and going after the Democrat Party for ignoring the fact that, we have all of these press conferences and arguing over illegal immigration in sanctuary states. Meanwhile, we had a young single mom who made a couple, mistakes in life, but she was not this violent person. She's trying to make a better life for herself, get a better opportunity for her son. And the state of Connecticut prosecuted her. Now, you actually were part of, and you and I had this conversation. I just kind of want to touch base a little bit on that and your involvement there, because I think this is really important distinction in how we see within the Republican Party. We just see character, the content of someone's character, and wanting to help everybody. This idea that Republicans are all racist, it's so mind-blowing. But I wanted to specifically talk about that case just for a brief moment to touch on that, because you were the lawyer that represented her, correct?
So that is absolutely correct.
Yeah. So can you just tell the listeners a little bit about, and I will be the first to admit, this was a Republican mayor who, under the current structure of our education system, I understand why a city like Norwalk is trying to protect the taxpayer. If we were a school choice state, this woman could have had the opportunity to send her child where she wanted to, but we're not. And the other fascinating thing is she was never pardoned. Correct, right? That is correct, right?
That's
which
correct.
Is insane to me. But anyway, just kind of touch base with everyone that's listening about that story in that case.
Well, let me first of all start off by saying thank you for having me on the show. And you're absolutely correct. It was a Saturday. I hadn't met you before, reached out to you, and I had some type of intrepidations, to be honest, when I was calling you, because they said that, you're the head of the Republican Party. And I thought, it's nothing possible like that we have in common. And when you picked up the phone, we talked for about 3 hours. And I was like, wow, I had that all wrong. And what's so encouraging as I stand here today as a newly minted Republican, as they're calling me now, I realize that we have more in common as people, regardless of the party affiliation, than we think. So when it came to that conversation that we had, we talked about Tanya McDowell, and when you brought it up, I said, "Oh my God, I was going to go down this road and say how." What am I doing running for mayor? I made the worst choice in the world defending this woman. And I'm thinking I'm going to shoot back by saying, as a Republican, you should respect the Constitution. And she had a constitutional right to defense. And then once we talked a little further, I said, wow, I didn't have to pull that out because you told me that you believe in school choice and the Republicans believe in school choice. And what Tanya McDowell was facing was homelessness. She was her parents lived in Bridgeport, so she had a registered address in Bridgeport, but she was transient because she was living out of her van in Norwalk, so that's where the van was parked. She was staying at the homeless shelter in Norwalk many times, and while all that was going on, she said, "You know what? My child shouldn't have to suffer, so I'm going to enroll him in Brookside." She went and interviewed with the principal there. The principal loved the kid. The kid was striving in Brookside, and then one day. The housing department found out that she was not living in Norwalk, and then they reported her to the prosecutor's office, and then she was arrested. And what's even worse, she was put on a $25,000 bond. I can go in for hours, but it was hell getting her out, and her family had no money. She had no money. And I couldn't believe, based on this charge, that they wouldn't give her a PTA.
Well, I think the part that, and I love to point out the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party when you talk about they have these photo ops down on the border talking about separation of of family members. Da, 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 da. Meanwhile, here's a prime example of a woman of color, a young single mom, who was separated from her child because she was trying to do right by him. Right. And what infuriates me is and I say this constantly, there was no press conference. Chris Murphy didn't stand by her side. Dick Blumenthal, Dan Malloy, no one offered to help her in that moment. Now, to your credit, it is no longer a criminal violation, right? It's a civil one. But even
that's correct. We tried to force that bill through, and they wouldn't let it go. And then we kept.
It's a no-brainer. I don't even understand Republican. It's a no-brainer. But they fought you on it, right?
They fought me on it, and we had to bury it inside of a cigarette bill, which said that you had to be 21 years and older to buy cigarettes. And in that bill, we also packed that it's no longer a crime to enroll your child in an out-of-district school. The compromise that Democrats wanted at the time was to say we will drop it from a felony to a misdemeanor. But we said, no, it shouldn't be a crime at all. So we won, and it's no longer a crime. Or if you're caught doing it, they just ask you.
Well, what's amazing is, and this was a few years ago, but I don't know if I ever told you the part of the op-ed that I wrote, which by the way no one would publish, and I have to see if I can pull it out. But I literally wrote how racist, and yes, I'm sitting here saying that the structure of how this is racist, and how Democrats are truly the party that protects the establishment connected elite, while within the African American community particularly, they know they have those votes locked up, so they really don't care or advocate that hard for anything. So my op-ed centered around the fact that there was a UConn professor of, I think, environmental science, who at the same time that this was happening to this young woman, I think he got caught not embezzling, but it was like basically like he was out on medical leave. And he got caught. His pension or whatever was more than it should have been because he had lied about his condition. So he got some medical early pension, whatever it was. I don't remember the exact details, but this is true. And he took $300,000 from the state of Connecticut. But alas, he was a wealthy, connected professor from UConn. And the state of Connecticut said, well, you know what? Just pay us back and it's fine. And that was my op-ed, comparing these two stories of two different Democrats. And the biggest difference is you have a white, wealthy, educated elitist who was protected by the union, was protected by the political class, and was allowed to just pay back the $300,000 that he fraudulently took from the state. Now, meanwhile, you have a woman who is struggling, trying to do right by her son. And they didn't even want it. It probably was the most uncomfortable conversation because, actually, it maybe wasn't that uncomfortable for Democrats because they don't really care. And that is one of the reasons. And I'm so happy that we had an opportunity to kind of bond over that issue. And so, that's the reality. I think a lot of times is that the policies that Democrats advocate for don't help people who are in poverty. They don't, and I think one of the things that I've always said is that I absolutely hate welfare. I don't hate the people on it. I hate the fact that we need it, which is very different. So all the policies and things that I support is advocating someone that doesn't need government assistance. But the first things Democrats do is, don't worry, we'll take care of you, as though your people are incompetent, and it's almost patronizing.
You know what's really interesting when you talk about that particular point, the optics, right? So I'm former president for the NAACP, was president for many years here, and now I'm a part of the Republican Party. And when I sit in a room with a bunch of Republicans and we're actually talking, we might argue for a little bit, but we're actually talking. And as we mature, I think we will, as we mature over the coming years in this party, can you imagine how effective it will be when we start talking about self-empowerment? And what's happening already is that the Democrats are looking and saying it's almost like one of our slaves got away. They want you on this plantation where nothing is happening. And so they didn't do anything for me, and I can get into that for a long time. But when I left, the chairman and other Democrats were calling friends of mine going, hey, did you hear Darnell became a Republican? What's going on? Almost like they missed me. But they didn't miss me. They didn't miss me. I was missing, if you would, from the plantation, and I wasn't accounted for. So the jig is going to be up when we start to talk and realize that there's no boogeyman sitting in the town hall, the Republican. And if in terms of race, white men are in the Democratic Party and white men are in the Republican Party, and they all aren't as cool as I would like them to be. But I'd rather be with the uncool whites over here, if you would, and that we could all get together and start arguing and thinking about things to make ourselves more self-sufficient. Because, I'll tell you, thank God I've been able to be financially set in this town. I'm well known in this town, and I work for every single dime that I have. And so I want to be in a room where other people are trying to work for everything that they have as well. And I don't need the promises. So when I leave the quote-unquote plantation, the Democrats get worried, but hey, the jig's up. Bernie Sanders is a well-heeled Democrat. Ned Lamont's a well-heeled Democrat, but they don't share the same stories as Tom.
No, well, and that's actually what I think I touched on, is that my upbringing in comparison to a lot of, I remember once, and I'm not going to give the person's names, but in college I was arguing with a well-connected Democrat who they're still really politically active today. I was in school with one of the children. And, it's easy to talk about higher taxes, and it's easier about, when you have money, when you're starting a small business, or and this is, and here's what I think the beauty of our country is, and where we are in this moment in time, is I think there's so many African Americans right now that have been successful, which, 30 years ago, they were denied this. Right. There was still that. And I'm sorry, I think the country 30, 40 years ago was more racist than it is today. And I see so many successful African Americans who, whether they own their own business, whether they're lawyers, whether they're, and they're starting to look and saying, well, wait a minute, these policies are not helping. Right. And what's interesting is that every cultural class that has come into this country now, and it's so unfortunate that I feel it's taken too long for this to kind of be an eye-opening moment for the African American community. But when Italians were here, everyone was a Democrat at first, and then they started open businesses, and they started to say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense to me. And so what's happened is I personally think that the Democrats have looked at the African American community and said, okay, we have their votes. We don't need to cultivate those relationships. We don't need that anymore. We're going to move on to the next group of immigrants that are coming here, which is within the Latin community. And we're going to go all in on protecting these future voters based on identity politics, because, and it's true. They when you have a group, and anyone that's listening to this that may be, African American and exploring the idea of what they're hearing, whether it's through Candace Owens or, even Kanye West, Democrats know you're not going anywhere. So there's no motivation to make you happy. The way that they hold the African American community as a voting bloc is through fear. When you look at, when I love, and I think I was talking to your campaign manager about this, Kirk, when they talk about Donald Trump being racist. Now, granted, I'm not going to defend some of the things that he said, but when it comes to the idea that he's racist, the First Step Act is huge in regards to criminal justice reform. When it talks about Republican governors across the country who've been leading, and Van Jones said this, Republicans have been leading on criminal justice reform because we believe in people. We want to invest in people. And I think it was Haley Barbour, former governor of Georgia, said we, as a society, we have to distinguish between who we're mad at and who we're afraid of. And the people we're mad at, and I've also argued this, you have a kid in New Haven whose parents may be struggling with addiction or maybe lack of education, and so they're working minimum wage jobs. That kid looks at a failing school district and says, I'm not going to be able to go to college. I'm going to sell weed on the street corner. Probably the smartest kid in the neighborhood. We can't throw that kid away. We have to retrain, re-educate, and show that kid how to run a barbershop, how to run a restaurant, how to open his own business, how to be a mechanic, because he obviously has an entrepreneurial spirit and he understands money. And I think this is where if African-American communities actually got an opportunity to sit down and talk to Republicans about this stuff, because here's what I know from an economic standpoint, if I can take someone who's living in the black market from an economic standpoint and make them a successful taxpayer, guess what? That's better for us. That's better for our school system. That's better for our local economy. It's better. And it's better for that person. And I think that's often what is never discussed, because immediately Democrats say all Republicans are racist. Don't listen to what they have to say.
Absolutely. And I would say this. Listen, I've been around Norwalk for a while, and I've been involved in city politics for a while. And when I say involved in city politics, it's not that I'm a politician, but I've been attuned to the things that we need in the city. And as a president for the NAACP, I always considered myself an NGO, like a non-governmental organization. And I would always say, well, is there any way that as a part of the NAACP, I could be of service to the city? And the more and more I grew up within this in this structure, I realized that the Democrats are like you said. They only want the people they can control, and they want to make sure that you have fear. So when I was talking in a language that didn't match their agenda, I was sort of pushed to the side. And I'll go ahead and put it out there. I ran for the judge of probate. I ran against a 19-year incumbent who was Republican, and we ran a civil race. He's a lawyer as well. We had great respect and reverence for each other. No one thought I could even come close to winning. He raised $60,000, and he's been doing this for 19 years. That was my first time out, and I raised $20,000, spent 14. And when the votes came out, he got 12,000, I got 10.
How close it was?
Believe
yeah.
How close it was. Then the next year,
so it's an open seat.
He retired that year because it's an open seat. So now I seek the Democratic nomination. And I say I go to the convention. Ned Lamont was there. He came and grabbed on my bow tie and shifted a little bit and gave me a cute smile. But they don't give a damn. So I come down to the city, and I say to the convention floor, I said, listen, I spent a lot of money blowing up these big pictures of me and Tony the Pantherist. And I said, here's Tony holding my sign. I'm holding his sign. And that's election night. He's holding vote for Darnell. I'm holding vote for Tony. That's what we talk about, civility. I said I got 10,000 of his 12 back then. I said, I'm clearly the front runner here, and I'm clearly the person that this convention should give the nomination to. And they gave it to a white gentleman who optically looks like it could have been because he's white and I'm black. But I think when you look deeper, it's probably because they felt that they can control him, and they didn't want self-reliance. They didn't want self-determination, someone who had their own independent thoughts, because that's not the Democratic way. And so he ended up getting the nomination, and he ended up winning the race. Now, I stand before you to say this. Every time they go down to D.C., Jim Himes comes back up.
I just want all the listeners to understand, you are someone who was heavily involved. It's not just that you were a Democrat. You were a heavily involved Democrat. And you've seen the inner workings of this, and it's just so much for a lot of Republicans listening. It's inspirational because you, and I don't think for anyone that doesn't understand politics, you had years of sweat equity involved and invested with the Democratic Party. And so for you to do this, and of course you're going to have the Democrats and even some Republicans, oh, he's just mad, he didn't get what he wanted. It's like, no. So that's a glimpse. That's a moment in time that most people get over. I think I have to give you credit because I think you're a principled person. We don't always have to agree, but I think you're a principled person. This isn't about a vendetta. What this is about is you started to see exactly what the Democratic Party is about. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but go back on Jim Hyde. I just wanted everyone to understand the context. You were a very, very involved. You were a delegate to the state convention. You had run for, you had a lot of sweat equity and time of your life. And for those that don't know, when you run for a city office, or you run for office, or you work on campaigns, it's a lot of volunteer time. It's time away from your family. It's time away from your job. And so all that sweat equity was gone for you at once you switched. So I just wanted everyone to understand that.
Yes. I thank you for doing that. And I'll jump on that and go back to what I was saying. I tell people oftentimes when you're running for office, it's the most loneliest time in your life. You don't know how lonely it is until you're doing this. When you have to knock on doors and make phone calls, or you have a sticker with your name on it, and a person who seems to love you all along, and you say, "Hey, can you wear the sticker?" And they hold it in their hand for an hour and they don't want to put it on. He's like, oh, "Damn, how much love do you really have?" But it's a really, really lonely time. But in terms of the rooms that I was talking about, I would see Jim Himes come back from D.C., and I would hope that we get an intelligent and articulate report as to the conditions of the country. And it would start off like something like this: "Hey, Washington's very scary right now. The things that's going on in D.C., it's so scary." And he does a little shake thing, and I'm putting him out there on blast. I don't care. And and he's like, "Oh, Washington's scary," and he keeps saying scary over and over, scary times and things that's going on with Trump, and it's scary. And the Democrats would just be like, "Ooh, ooh, scary." And meanwhile, I'm from the Bronx. I'm not scared of what's going on in Washington, D.C. I'm scared of what's going on in the alleyway where people don't have jobs.
Right.
And they might want to rob me. D.C. doesn't scare me. So I'm like, okay, can you get to the point? What's so scary? And they never do it. And they never
Right.
get
The
to the
First
point.
Step Act.
But there is this fear-mongering.
When you always go...
Yeah, just to scare the heck out of you. Yeah, that's all. And so that's the point. They try to scare you, and it's not really about that. Criminal justice reform is great, and Donald Trump has moved that needle along. And I believe some of the Democrats was the ones slowing that needle up. But why would you be doing that? And so I think I'm hoping that we get to the point where both Democrats and Republicans can work together. I think I'm that change agent for my city. Because the Democrats.
So yeah, let's
people,
switch to that, Darnell. Let's talk about,
really
what do you think the biggest challenge facing Norwalk is right now?
So I think what we have in Norwalk is a situation where you have a mayor who I think is happy with the position, and the position is self-serving. And so what I mean by that is, because it's all about him, he's not focusing on the people themselves. And this is what you find. Unlike myself, who I'm going to still talk that talk, Republican or Democrat, I'm not changing. Mr. Rilling was a Republican, I believe, from all the research I'm finding, and switched over. I interviewed a bunch of people who told me that he told them, "Hey, switch from Republican to Democrat because I need your vote." So this thing was all about him. Now, what I find is that he's now bloating city government. We Republicans want smaller city government. He has himself as the mayor with a salary. Then he named a deputy mayor, which we never had before. We didn't have it under Moshe. And that person gets like $160 a year. Then he has Mario Capolo, which is a corporation counsel from an outside firm. They get probably about $160, $170. And then we have the corporation counsel department led by Jeff Spar. So you have the mayor and then deputy, and then another lawyer, and then
that's definitely
corporation counsel. So the
Democrats definitely love to make government bigger. And never make. I mean, you see it at the state level, right? Like the state, I think, is losing jobs every month, but yet we're somehow are finding new positions in state government. They won't cut anything, and this is exactly, it's kind of their playbook, right? They start a program, they create a job, and then when you go, okay, I don't think we need this, they're like, well, what are we going to do about these legal cases? What are we going to do for the children? What are we going to do for the seniors? Because they kind of create this air, and it goes back to, you said it, the fear, whether it's a local municipality or whether it's national politics. Democrats are all about creating a fear or victim if you decide to cut something. And to your point is that the bloated mayor's office in a Democrat city, color me shocked, right?
And when you talk about this to the people, you say to them, "Do we need such a fat, bloated mayor's office?" And then they look at you like you have 10 heads. And here's a trick. Here's a kicker. I was the moderator for what they call Pie in Politics, put on by the League of Women Voters in Norwalk, and I was a moderator for like 5 years. So I would have Bob Duff and all the people on the panel. And when I would talk to these people, I would be the one throwing out the questions. Hey, Mr. Duff, your turn. Gail Lavielle, your turn. Whatever. And they would all say in Connecticut, we don't have a money problem per se in terms of making money.
Correct.
We have a spending problem. So I'm like, wow, did you come up with that on your own? And I would say to them, well, if you have a spending problem,
right,
stop spending,
or at least prioritize. Right,
like
I'm certainly someone who, and I've said this before when we talk about like the tolls issue and how the Democrats since 2012 have diverted about $2 billion out of the special transportation fund, and of course now they're saying like, well, the roads aren't fixed. Well, yeah, because anyway. Everyone knows the story, but the point is that it would be hard for me to argue if they took that $2 billion and put it towards the pension fund, right? Some long-term liability issue that we're having. My mother's a retired teacher. There's a lot of people that we've had contracts for and they're dependent on their money. So Republicans aren't unreasonable. The problem is that when they took this $2 billion since 2012, they put it in their operating budget, right? They're meeting expenses in the moment. And so they haven't invested for the future. They haven't protected future generations. And so even then, I'd be hard pressed to say, look, we had to take the money out of the divert money out of the special transportation fund in order to shore up our pension system so that we could get a better credit rating, so that we didn't have to deal with the debt ceiling, whatever it may be. But that's how they did. They literally took the money and used it for operating expenses to pay for pet projects it's mind numbing. And I always laugh when this year, when we talked about like the Republicans' plan, which is prioritize progress, Democrats all of a sudden have a problem with borrowing money. Right now, all of a sudden, it's like, no, we can't borrow any more money. Literally a year ago, you were borrowing money to build a splash pad in Hartford. I'm not making that up, right? And this is where it goes back to the Democrats are always about power, not actual leadership, which is to be honest about the situation Connecticut's in and making hard decisions. And Darnell, I'm so happy to have you in the party. I'm so happy to have you as a candidate because I think we're going to see more and more people that want to just do well for their communities. And I talk about this all the time. I love that I get to point to cities around the state that are led by Republicans and they're led well. Like New Britain's a prime example, right? New Britain's led by Republicans. When was the last time you heard a major city that didn't have a tax increase? Right, that happened in New Britain this year.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
When was the last time that happened in Norwalk, where they didn't raise taxes? I'm so excited. So the government's bloated in Norwalk, and I think you and I also talked a little bit about there's a problem within the education system in Norwalk.
Well, a couple things I want to touch on with that, and in terms of what we just finished talking about. In terms of the spending problem that we're having. So judges at one point were allowed to join the bench and at 68 years old or so, and then retire
on the state level,
and get a full pension.
Yeah.
And on a state level, and that's insane. So now they're trying to make it more equitable, where they say, well, you have to at least serve for 10 years or so before you retire, before you get a pension, because we have to pay that pension.
It's crazy.
Health insurance forever. So judges were getting on for 2 years, and this is under Democratic rule. So because of that, I found that wasn't equitable. That wasn't equitable.
Fair. It's not fair.
Make sense. So it's not fair. So I have a little thing that, as a Republican, and it's a shocker, and it's provocative, as Kanye would say. It's provocative. So I've been going around saying, as a Republican mayor, I'm going to bring ICE to Norwalk. And anybody goes, well, what is he talking about? And I explained to them that by bringing ICE to Norwalk, I mean we're going to bring I, integrity, C, collaboration, and E, equity. We're going to have more integrity in the system. We're going to collaborate more with the stakeholders, and we're going to look for an equitable distribution of wealth. So that's Darnell, the new Republican, bringing ICE to Norwalk. And everybody laughs about it. But that's
it's definitely a catchphrase that's going to get you some attention. We were actually just talking about the other ICE. But I think the part that what everyone needs to understand when a Republican says, and I know you're going to agree with me, is when we say equitable, it's equitable for the taxpayer. Right. So many Democrats, when they talk about equitable, it's like, let me take from this person and give to this person that supports me only. Right. Republicans don't look at it from that context. Right. So the way Democrats are like, I'm going to take from this person that I have deemed has too much. Right. So they're the moral authority. And by the way, you see this play out all the time. Democrats get to be the moral authority on everything. What's right or wrong. They tell you are wrong. and it's very difficult oftentimes arguing with someone who's really liberal and explain to them that their opinion is not a fact. It's almost childlike or arrogant, right? That I believe X, therefore it's factual. It's actually, no, that's not true. So they get to say, we're going to take from this constituency, which we don't like, and we're going to give to this constituency that makes sure that they vote us in. And then what happens is that constituency gets dependent on whatever they're giving them, and then they create that fear of, you can't do better than this. It's really sad that the Democrats are obsessed with creating a political class. I mean, you see this in major cities. Norwalk is not, I would say, as bad as, say, Bridgeport, Hartford, or New Haven, that has these political ecosystems that live off the government system. And then, that keeps them, it consolidates their power, keeps them in control, and keeps them fat, rich, and happy. I mean, my favorite.
But the problem we have with that is, like, and I'm looking at this, we have something called a mill rate. So a mill rate is how they assess these taxes on the properties, etc. So I've been doing some research and I said to a bunch of people, and how do we get the mill rate down? And then the answer was, Hartford has to allocate more money to your city, to an individual city, and if you have more money in your city, then the mill rate can go down and people can pay less taxes. It's just
That's not actually the answer, though. But yeah.
So that's not. So, but say if you have a Westport and they say, you know what, we don't want CVS, we don't want this, we don't want that, then they have to pay probably more taxes because they don't have
the grand list growth,
right? The town helping with the taxes. Exactly. So here we have this, and I say to myself, well, you have West Hartford and cities like that who they get allocations from Hartford and it helps them out. And then we have here, back to the incestuous relationship, where you help me, I help you. We have the mayor, who's very cool, Bob Duff, who's a lifelong Democrat who does, in my opinion, little to nothing but cut ribbons. And so you have Bob Duff going up to Hartford with a bag, and he comes back with a bag with a couple pennies in it. And then so Harry, who's the mayor, should look at him and say, listen, I can't help these people of Norwalk if you're not coming back. That doesn't happen. Why? Because Bob will donate to Harry's campaign. Harry will donate to Bob's campaign. And that's the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter.
Right.
They're not going to yell at each other. But, elect me and I'm going to fix that. You got to be doing the right thing. And as a lawyer, I'm going to be looking at the numbers and making sure anybody who's on Team Norwalk, you better be carrying your weight. And you better be coming back with the proper allocations, financial allocations for my city, or we have a
So
problem.
What you're saying is Bob Duff's been short on delivering what Norwalk needs.
Literally and figuratively.
So, well, listen, Darnell, I really appreciate you coming on. I'm regardless of what happens with the convention and the primary. I know there's some chaos down there where some Republicans want to pick someone who's actually not a Republican, which is it makes me crazy. But I think there's something bigger happening here, and I want to be a part of a broader conversation within groups of African American people of color, and I'm so thrilled to have a younger generation of people like I am. I mean, I'm 40, and I know that's not really young anymore, but I'm so excited because I know we talked about, I think with Kurt, sitting down with a group of African Americans to talk about the Republican Party, because I think there is this waning. And Monday, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed for you. I know you have a kickoff thing tonight. So
yes.
Well, I got to kind of stay out of it until you got, that's the tough part of being party chairman. But as you know, I'm really
I'm gonna have to press on you with that, because that was almost like the Michelle Obama and the Kamala Harris position. Obama won't say anything for Biden, even though they were great friends. And but what I'm saying is that the IMF, when you came down and spoke to the IMF, which is the head of the black churches, they all looked at me like, wow. And I've been getting calls like they're really considering the Republican Party. And so when you come down, you're just listening. All you're doing is listening to the candidates. You're not sitting out waiting. I think as the chairman,
I think Republic.
That political, you can come down and hear the platform and say, okay. And if there's one across, if the quote unquote independent is doing something, you can watch that too. But as the only Republican candidate running here, I don't think that you should have to stay away. You should come down and listen to the steel pan drums, listen to my platform, and jump in your car, tell your
Well,
driver, head
well,
back north if you want to.
I
So
will try. I
please
don't know. I
come.
actually am going to a fundraiser tonight for another mayoral candidate. First select woman candidate. Yeah. So I
Oh,
will
see,
try. But I will tell you that I think, and I hope Republicans realize, you present a unique opportunity to broaden that conversation. And I think one of the things that I always say, and I think the reason the IMF conversation went so well was because I don't say be a Republican. I simply say give us an opportunity to
right,
win your vote. Right? Just take down all the barriers that you've been fed by the Democratic Party. Just listen to see what we have to say. And I think if that happens more and more, I think the Republican Party is going to make pretty significant gains within a lot of the African American community, and I'm excited that you've presented that opportunity to us, and I hope the people in Norwalk see that opportunity as well. I know sometimes Republicans can be a little old school, right? They see someone that just switched parties and they get a little nervous. What they really do? But
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, I think they have to evaluate, and that's why I mentioned that sweat equity and all the time and energy and years you put into the Democratic Party. You can't go back. This was not a snap decision on your part. This was about integrity for you, and I hope Republicans realize. That you present this unbelievable opportunity for us. I really believe that.
But and I want to say to you, one, until you and I, this conversation wasn't happening, and until you and I, the IMF didn't know about Republicans on this level. They only look at DC. So I'm encouraged that that people like you and I can continue to have this local conversation. And what I'm also encouraged about is the fact that you also have to take some punches because in your congratulations with you
Thank you.
getting your winning. I couldn't believe that you were too poor to be Republican, which was a big part of
Well,
your
some
thing.
people think that. Some
So I was
people
like,
think that.
everybody thinks, and I don't mean
Oh
to
no,
call you poor. What I mean, I think your opponent was throwing it out there that you just don't fit the quote unquote classic Republican, rich old white guy. And so you, as a white person, have a fight within your own
yeah,
setup. So we have more in common than we think. It's people who are trying to achieve, people who want the best, people who want to fight against classism, if you would. So when your opponent tried to make it seem like you didn't fit the profile, that was ridiculous because you're one of the
I
hardest
appreciate
working
that,
people that
Darnell.
I've seen.
And look, it's not uncommon. I think and I laughed growing up in the smallest city in the state. Graduating high school with 55 kids. I have a fighter spirit, so I think I'm not gonna. That was their campaign strategy. At the end of the day, I'm happy that I was chosen again by the committee. We've really done a lot of great work here, and I'm excited to continue that work. Obviously when I look at things like with a mentality of an ex-athlete, like having gone through looking at the game tape. Where's my footwork? I that's exactly how I've analyzed the 2018 election. Probably more than people have realized how my staff does an unbelievable job and going through exactly what our next step should be. So I do appreciate that, and I'm so thankful, and I hope to have you on again. I'm hoping to sit down with your campaign manager, who also similarly, is
Yes.
someone who has left the Democratic Party. We had a conversation. I don't know that he's fully left, but he's kind of opening an eyes.
No, he's a
His
registered
eyes are
yet, but
getting his
going to
eyes are
register.
opening a little bit based on a lot of the conversations that we've had, and I'm excited about these opportunities, and again, it's not about necessarily registering as a Republican. It's simply about being able to hear two sides of the story, and
Yes. And so I want to just say a couple last words with that is that I never asked my manager to cross over to be Republican. I never sought out a Republican manager. I sought out a person who had the
yeah,
same visions and energy that I had, and he happens to be a Democrat, and he was the field director for Ned Lamont, did all that stuff. And so if I was just party politics, I'd be like, I can't trust him. But I trust him because he has the same visions. And if I could have the last words, I just want to share my campaign slogan, which is "Let's fix it." And a lot of the campaign slogans are about hopes and dreams and, yes, we cans and stuff like that. But no one ever asks anybody in their town what's wrong in your life. And so what I've been going around asking people, hey, what's going on in your life? Is there anything that we can fix for you? And they've been calling me saying, hey, the traffic lights are not working here and such things like that. And also, I make the analogy that if you walk into somebody's house with your own hopes and dreams and aspirations, and say you're a plumber and you go, I want to make all these pipes copper, and you start fixing pipes, and then the guy goes, hey, that looks really beautiful, but the leaking pipe is this one. You never asked me which one I need to fix.
It's true.
What have you done? So that's why our campaign slogan is let's fix it. And we want to hear from the people what's wrong so we can fix it. Cory Booker shares, a nice flowery slogan. Elizabeth Warren has another flowery about hope, dreams. But are you asking the people what's wrong? And so here in Norwalk on a local level, I don't want another flowery slogan. I want to
get to work.
How can we fix it? And that's why let's get to work.
So the other thing, and I'll leave you with this, Darnell, is that if anyone gives you a hard time about switching, being a former Democrat, what I would remind them is that two of the most famous Republican politicians in the last 50 years were Ronald Reagan and Rudy Giuliani, both of which were Democrats. And I think my favorite quote was, I think it was Rudy Giuliani when he was asked about switching. He said, Democrats talk about great things. Republicans do great things. And I'm so happy to have you on board, and good luck tomorrow night in the convention to be the mayor of Norwalk.
Thank you so much. And I would say another quote, Reagan said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me with their bad ideas.
Thank you, Darnell. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.